Hello, and welcome to our session entitled Innovation in Study Designs and Types of Trials. We're thrilled to welcome two international members to our to our panel today. First is Ritu Malhotra. Ritu is lead clinical scientist, product development oncology officer at Genentech. She joined Genentech in 2018 and has since been leading clinical biomarker operations in clinical science in late-stage drug development for solid tumor indications in platform studies. She believes in putting patients first and taking innovative and disruptive steps in the clinical trial process to help bring treatments to patients faster. With her today is Taras Carpiac, who is the Executive Director of Innovation and Process Improvement at Amgen Global. In this role, Taras oversees transformation efforts within the clinical trial domain, with a focus on embedding new ways of working and executing with speed, agility, and quality. Taras is excited about the potential for new trial execution models to accelerate the pace at which high-quality medicines can be brought to patients. On a personal note, I've had the very distinct pleasure of working with both Ritu and Taras over the past couple of months behind the scenes, and I can say with certainty that both have been excited to collaborate on this topic. This session is an open conversation between Ritu, who is a researcher responsible for clinical trial design, and Taras, the clinical operations team that makes it all happen. Together, we'll discuss innovation in study design and types of trials. We'll talk for about 30 minutes, and then we have an open Q&A session for the balance of the 10 minutes that are left in this session. So please ensure that you submit your questions throughout the conversation. Ritu, I'd like to start with you and maybe just setting the stage in terms of what kind of innovation are we seeing in clinical trial design in oncology today?
No, thanks, Anne-Marie, and thanks for the kind introduction you had, and definitely a great question to be discussing today, because indeed, clinical trial design has evolved quite a bit over the years compared to how we used to run our traditional clinical trials. We know with traditional models, we were just investigating one or two interventions, which was not only expensive and time consuming, it was rather challenging. And the truth of the matter today is that there are so many indications with huge unmet needs that patients are essentially waiting for treatment options, right? So we need to deliver those options rather faster to the patients. And the current landscape with the technologies we have and the evolution of those technologies we've seen over the course of years has been super exciting. And I have to say, this is a great time to be in this field where we are trying to see this big shift towards precision medicine or personalized healthcare. And there's also an interest, which is rather increasing, in performing mechanism-based trials. And these are trials which are different in a way because the eligibility is based on criteria, which is not the traditional disease definitions. It's more genetic markers or biomarkers. So I guess the idea here is to address more questions more efficiently, but in rather less amount of time. So now there has been an emergence of what we call as master protocols. And these are kind of defined as overarching protocols, which are designed to answer multiple different questions. You might have heard of terms like umbrella trials or basket trials, or even platform trials. So all these different kind of trials are what fall under the category of master protocol. So something like an umbrella trial, right? So it's literally thinking of an umbrella, and we are looking at a single disease, but then each of the spoke of that umbrella is a different targeted therapy. So what we are trying to do here is to study multiple targeted therapies, but in context of a single disease. But then in contrast, when we talk about basket trials, those would be the trials where you're studying one targeted therapy, but then that's in context of like multiple different indications. So that's like a basket of indications where you're looking at one single therapy and how it can impact different diseases. And then platform trials, that kind of takes it to like a next level altogether, because there we are not only studying all these multiple targeted therapies in context of a single disease, but it has the flexibility, like based on seeing these early signals, these are safety signals or even potentially like efficacy signals, you can stop the treatment arms or even add new treatment arms. So one such example which I can share from Roche Genentech is the Morpheus platform trial. And Morpheus platform is essentially a set of trials, phase 1b, phase 2, which are run across like multiple different indications. And what we are focusing on is all like solid tumor indications. And this is a great signal seeking platform where you evaluate like multiple different novel combinations across multiple indications. And I have to say, like, the beauty of the platform is that it is facilitating faster decision making with like greater confidence than like the conventional basket trials. So essentially, what you're doing is you're combining efficacy, efficiency, speed, and confidence. And that's what makes it like a truly flexible or agile platform. You can start with like enrolling a smaller number of patients to seek like those very quick safety and efficacy signals from these combinations. And based on the data, so if the results are positive, then you can expand the number of patients, you can enroll more patients just to ensure that the signal you were seeking was actually robust, it was real. But then many a times what happens is like we do not really see a signal. And that's an opportunity where it's like, okay, we've tested these combinations, there's no signal, we'll close those combinations. But how about putting in new combinations, which could be options for treatment for patients, and we can do it in the same protocol. So that's the flexibility which we get with these platform trials. And that's where we are in that space where in the current times, the whole scene for the clinical trial design is evolving.
Thank you for that. You shared you shared so much incredible information. I just want to make sure that we've got some language that may be new to some of our audience members. So you've used words like umbrella trials, basket trials, platform trials. They're all different, are they? Or tell me what's different about them and tell me what's the same about them. Just for clarity.
Yeah. Definitely. So maybe, yeah, like I said, for an umbrella trial, we are looking at like one single disease, but then we are trying to look at multiple different kinds of therapies in a trial. And then basket is just the opposite. So in a basket trial, you're putting multiple different indications, but you're trying to look at like one therapy to look into like interventions for all those different indications. And like I said, it's all based on like precision medicine right now. So maybe there's like a biomarker target, which could be common across different indications, or like new immunotherapies, which would work across different indications. So then you can set up like a basket and try that single intervention across multiple different indications.
All right. So we need to be cautious how we use all of the language around that. And so the Morpheus trial is a platform trial. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Right.
Yes.
Right. And so what do you think are fundamentally, to summarize before I ask Teres to join the conversation, what are fundamentally the biggest benefits for patients out of these rather, one could argue, highly specialized precision medicine oriented trials? What are the benefits for patients, particularly in these trials?
No, definitely a great question. I guess the first and foremost, I would say, because the way these trials are set up, there's a lot of flexibility with the master protocol and like opening cohorts, closing cohorts, combining different indications with like single agent, or having like a single disease and then combining different multiple, trying to see how different targeted therapies would work in different indications. So we are trying to achieve a lot with like less, like smaller trials. So that's flexibility, that's speed and agility in like decision making. And like in case of like a platform trial like Morpheus, like if you see a signal, can it ungate like larger trials? So you don't have to go through that conventional phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. So you can have a phase 1b, phase 2, and if you see a signal, it might even ungate like a phase 3 study from a sponsor. So that speed, agility, faster decision making. A lot of times, since we are starting small with the number of patients, I guess cost could be an added benefit, starting small and then expanding into bigger trials. And I'm sure Tyrus can very well talk about like the operational efficiencies we can achieve from these trials, right? Once we have set up and run like platform trials or even umbrella and basket trials. So
yeah, thank you. And that's a perfect bridge to Taras, who, with all of the innovation and types of trials and the specialization, which seems to be getting bigger and better every single day, from an operational perspective, it must be like drinking from a fire hose a little bit.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for the chance to be here. I was looking forward to this conversation very much. But you're right. I mean, I think from a ClinOps lens, the innovative designs of the type that Ritu's describing can really help us actually solve for a lot of the operational challenges that might otherwise be present in precision medicine-based approaches. And so those of us on the ClinOps side of the shop, like myself, certainly share the same enthusiasm that the potential that these study designs have to offer. And so, I mean, what do I mean by that? So in general, the innovative designs, the type of studies, the platform, basket, umbrella that Ritu's described, they help us navigate complexity a bit more elegantly. So when you think really what we're doing here, if we're evaluating different treatment options in parallel or testing against different cancer types, the traditional approach that we would take in ClinOps just wouldn't be feasible or efficient. When you need to get to that right segmented patient population and be flexible and answer different scientific questions, we would otherwise be just starting individual studies for each question that we're exploring or each therapeutic combination that we're generating evidence for. And that would be a lot of administrative white space or just wasteful duplication. Starting multiple trials, time in startup, building all the technical databases, all the IRB and ethics approval. If you're trying to answer many different scientific questions in parallel, it just isn't operationally feasible to do those all as individual trials unto themselves. So in ClinOps, I mean, we really see the promise in how these designs can help us more efficiently generate high quality evidence and narrow in more quickly on the most promising treatment options. We have a program at Amgen in oncology, a great example of this, master protocol looking at treatment across multiple different cancer types stemming from the same mutation. So, this is important from an efficiency in generating evidence, quickly perspective. I will say, though, from an operation lens, that the benefits do come with some added complexity that the ClinOps teams need to be aware of and plan for. So some examples of that might be, navigating all of the various pre-planned decision points and interim analyses and basically planning ahead for the opening and closing of treatment arms, for example. If you're not on point with your planning, you're going to be looking at frequent amendments. That can mean contract changes or delays to your studies. Your clinical systems are going to be more complex in general. So your clinical trial database or the systems that randomize and manage your trial drug. But probably most important, you really need to think through the design up front through a patient lens and the site lens. You need to think through all of the moving pieces in the study, especially, for example, for newer investigators participating in trials. Patients really need to understand clearly how the trial fits in their treatment journey, and investigators need to understand how to kind of work through these more complex adaptive trials. So, I mean, I raise all this because our colleagues in the therapeutic areas and biostats, as we adopt more and more of these complex and innovative trial types, we in ClinOps are evolving, to make sure that we can support the trials and move at the speed of the science. But really just see a tremendous amount of promise there in terms of really the goal, which is evaluating treatment options for patients more quickly and reaching the right scientific answer with quality evidence faster.
Thank you, Taras. I was very curious in a comment you made around, just this concept of pre-planning and particularly from a patient perspective, is probably bigger than it's ever been as part of the process. Is there any best practices that you can share at this stage from a planning
Yeah, this is
perspective?
it absolutely. It's an important area of focus. And so, in general, when you look at it kind of through the macro lens, we're seeing the coming together of several important, just powerful changes to how trials are designed, and then by extension, how they're conducted. And all of it kind of gets the planning. So certainly the growth of precision medicine-based approaches, which Ritu is talking about, which we're talking about here today, how these complex and innovative designs allow us to evaluate therapeutic options more quickly. It's really important when you're sort of planning for this, that you've sort of thought ahead around the different permutations, the different interim analyses, et cetera. Again, because what you're trying to do is avoid starting individual studies for each permutation. But at the same time, we kind of have more of a focus on patient-centered drug development and having the patient journey really be core to drug development, ensuring that their experiences, their needs are meaningfully incorporated every step along the way. And that includes caregivers. We also want to understand how investigators and site staff who may be excited to participate in clinical research, how that can kind of incorporate into their already busy clinical practice. So when you talk about the best practice I can give is really don't short shrift that planning up front. Kind of really understand the patient journey, how they're going to respond to the trial, what burden it may put on them, how you can manage down that burden. Ensure the investigators that you're partnering with who are bringing their patients onto your trial understand how the trial will work, get their input in terms of how you can alleviate pain points, and have a really strong partnership between your clinical scientists, your biostatisticians, your drug supply colleagues, your ClinOps partners, to just fully understand how the study will unfold, so that you've thought around as many corners as possible, and it's a smooth, seamless experience for the investigators, the patients, the caregivers that are partnering with you in the research.
Thank you so much. I want to, Ritu, go back to you and get your perspective on what I call the utilization of biomarkers in clinical trials. This is the future more and more, and that specialization, again down to an N of 1, is really putting, demanding closer relationship between ops and trial design folks. Can you just comment on that and how biomarkers particularly are impacting study design? And then I'm going to pass it over to you, Teres, to talk about how you're capturing some of the impacts of using biomarkers in trials.
Thank you. And thanks, Taras, because definitely all these trial evolutions have added to the complexity of how a trial is even started and implemented across. So, and biomarkers are starting to be the key in terms of how we can get to that precision medicine, trying to identify what key targets can be leveraged in terms of patient's disease profile, and what can be pulled in from information from the genetics per se, and how we can have our medications or therapeutics be targeted to those specific mutations, and how can we follow up and track these biomarker progressions, how they are mutated over the course of time with the treatments, how these biomarkers can be tracked. And I think one added complexity I would add, and that's again tied to biomarkers, is development of companion diagnostics, because that's where it's these are all the tests which are tied to these specific genetic mutations or biomarkers in the clinical trial setup. And a lot of these trials have these as combinations products, right? So they can help in identifying the patient population, the treatment decisions you make. And these could be different, either it could be in vitro diagnostic, or these could be even imaging tools. And they basically provide the information in terms of how essentially safe and effective they are, along with the use of the corresponding therapeutic product. So it's kind of marrying the product to an assay, which is biomarker driven. And you can essentially see the journey of a patient in terms of not just identifying the right patient population, but also what's the response of the patient through the course of the treatment. So those are really exciting tools. And there are a lot of examples which have been approved by health authorities, but I think one which really stands in my head or my mind in current times is like using liquid biopsies or circulating tumor DNA. And that's really cool in terms of like the technology, the space we are in, because instead of using all these invasive technologies like biopsies from patients and trying to see like how the patient is responding to this treatment, like has the patient progressed or the treatment is really benefiting the patient, we can just use like liquid biopsy samples like a blood sample and track that journey for the patient to see that progression in terms of like treatment response to the patient. So really exciting tools to follow that biomarker journey in terms of like a companion diagnostic also, for example. But at the same time, there's a lot of added expense in developing these technologies. And at the time where we are, these are expensive technologies to be rather approved and put into like a clinical trial setup. But then again, it's such a huge promise we hold for like a patient's journey and understanding the treatment responses to patients, that it's exciting to see how these would evolve in time and be able to help the patients move further. So,
I mean, Taras, what are the implications of that on the work that you do? And, you know, just as a broader question, because Ritu, you raised it, is that, you know, how fundamentally common is this concept of tracking biomarkers throughout a process? Are we far away from this? Is it relatively close? Taras, if you want to comment on that, that would be very helpful.
Sure. I mean, I think maybe more generally, the kind of biomarker-driven trials or drug development that Ritu is referencing is obviously kind of increasing, you know, more and more. It is the fundamental underpinning of kind of precision medicine-based trials, and where a lot of the therapeutic options are being explored right now. And you know, one thing that Ritu alluded to, and is what it requires is just exquisite coordination between clinicians and operations staff and drug supply staff and your biomarkers and diagnostics teams. And that planning is just so essential to get this right. And it's just a new set of questions that you answer along the way. If as Ritu you know, mentioned, if a companion diagnostic is to be used, you need to understand what assay you're going to use, how easy or applicable is it to use in a clinical trial setting, for example. You know, there's other things through the ClinOps lens that we need to kind of prepare for supporting you know, biomarker-driven research. You know, for folks that may be in the audience listening that are kind of, you know, from the sponsor side, you really need to be mindful of kind of potential additional complexity in trial setup. You know, making sure all of the kind of sample collection and processing procedures are in place. Make sure to help the investigators and site staff through this. You know, it's complex. It comes with additional responsibilities, and you really want to kind of make sure they kind of understand you know, how to navigate this as they bring their patients onto your trial. From a ClinOps lens, you really need to kind of understand enrollment planning and anticipating screen failure rates, you know, which may be higher often when you're searching for a particular patient characteristic, certainly versus a more traditional all-comers approach. And the regulatory landscape is still evolving here. Certainly, most for global multi-center trials. You know, that's certainly most, you know, the in vitro diagnostic regulation in Europe is kind of where a lot of this is being worked out. But in general, the regulatory landscape is evolving here around how to, you know, appropriately incorporate biomarker-driven research and where you're going. So it kind of comes back, you know, in terms of incorporating this through the drug development process to the theme that, you know, we talked about in the kind of previous question, just around design right the first time and kind of the yet more important coordination between therapeutic area and statistics and your site, you know, your relationship with your clinical sites, and kind of understanding that you can understand the investigator's journey through the study and follow with their eyes and make sure that you've you know, put in place the right support and infrastructure to help them through it.
Yeah, thank you so much. I want to jump to the conversation around, because again, there's been so much since the pandemic on decentralized trials. I wanted to get each of your perspectives on that. It's applications in oncology, how you see the future of decentralized trials, particularly in the field of oncology. Ritu, I'll go to you first.
No, thanks, Anne-Marie. And that's right. Like with decentralized trials coming in more and more, especially after the pandemic, we are essentially trying to bring an increasing proportion of our trials activities to the patients versus that traditional model, right? That the patients need to come to like the trial site. So there's a lot of work being done to understand like the patient journey, how the patients prefer to participate in a trial, and then how can we even better support a patient through like their journey on a trial, right? Like because it's always tied to like how can we retain the patients in our trial, and that's the most comprehensive way for us to kind of get the data for when the patients are on trial till like the whole journey of the study. So in doing all this, from like a clinical perspective, I think all these tools are great, but we need to kind of ensure that we maintain the trial integrity because there are so many variables we'll have to try to control, and there might be cases or tools where we need to be even aware of like what are the sources of the biases and how can we control those biases. Can we put some mitigations in place to avoid those? And with these tools, like Taras just mentioned, right, the regulatory guidelines are very different in different countries, and a lot of these are also evolving across the countries. So understanding the differences, but kind of keeping the data integrity is what I feel is the key, so that when we look at a trial as a whole, we are able to make those right conclusions from our trials. So again, trial design and then implementation become super key for using all these decentralized tools.
Thank you. Taras, again, would you like to comment on that? Especially the proliferation of, I'll use the word tools, is rather extraordinary, regulatory issues aside, and that makes your job both hard and arguably easier, but I'd prefer, what's your perspective?
I think, yeah, thank you. I think it's a really exciting opportunity in space right now across all therapeutic areas, including oncology. You're right. I mean, the decentralized techniques just really hit a different gear altogether over the past couple of years, prompted by the need to keep trials running through the impact of the pandemic, right? You had trial centers that were dealing with just unprecedented strain. You had participants that may have been reticent, understandably, to risk exposure by coming in the clinic. And it's just a great example, I feel, of kind of private and regulatory coming together to allow some flexibilities to say, how can we help keep patients on trial? How can we reduce the burden for site staff to keep patients on trial? And so a lot of this has kind of flourished over the last couple of years. But even prior to the pandemic, we know just a relatively small percent of eligible patients choose to participate in clinical trials. And some of those reasons are burden and barriers, distance from a trial center. Most potential participants don't live within 2 hours of a clinical trial center. And so decentralized, as we look at it, is just really the full array of approaches to help clinical research fit more into a participant's daily life and bring the trial to them, as opposed to adding additional burden to what is to them to participate. So when we look at all of the array of things that we have, everything from kind of home health care and direct to home distribution of study medicine to being able to use local labs or images for part of the schedule of assessments, or certainly things like passive data collection through wearables or sensors, et cetera. There's a lot of applicability to oncology, but as with any study, as with anything, you need to take a deliberate approach, really understand, like Ritu's saying, the nature of the data that's being collected, how you control for sources of bias or heterogeneity. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach, but certainly in oncology, we see clear application in screening and consent or collection of some of the data, such as vitals, depending on the nature of the investigational product. As I mentioned, certainly home health care or sample collection or IP administration, even depending on the nature of the drug, can be brought to the patient at times. And one of the areas that's really burgeoning is around ePros, or the instruments that collect kind of patient-reported outcomes. Having that not be something you have to come in and kind of remember and do at the clinic, but on an ongoing basis. So, I think there's a lot of applicability. Much of what was stood up over the course of the pandemic is going to be durable and just become part of how we work. But I will say, just through my own lens, is we don't see decentralized techniques that I just described as just being an end on their own. It's really part of a bigger picture of just patient-centered approach to drug development, like understanding as you kind of go about, describing your protocol and your development program, what impediments to participation do we see? How can we reduce those impediments? How do we understand sources of burden for coordinators or investigators or caregivers, participants? How can we reduce, the time toxicity? And so I think going forward, there's a lot of maturing of these approaches, and we know that patients want to participate in trials in different ways. Some patients may live far from a trial center, find it a burden to come in as often as the schedule of assessments may prescribe. I live far away. It's hard on my caregiver. Can some of this come to me in my home? It's difficult for me to make that trip each week. And other participants may want to go to the site and speak with the coordinator or the doctor that they know and trust. And so we want to endeavor to find different ways to allow participants to join trials, while ensuring, as Ritu said, the kind of consistency and data integrity that you need to have. Ultimately, you need to make sure that the data has the rigor that's appropriate. But how can we kind of open the aperture in terms of ways that patients can participate?
Yeah. I'm going to finish on one final question. I'm going to put you both on the spot a little bit. I have to say that, just your commitment to, your passion around putting patients center stage shows so clearly in both of your conversations. Ritu, if you need one thing from ClinOps, just one thing from ClinOps, and then in the near future to help you be more patient-centric in your trial design, what might that be? And Taras, I'm going to ask you to answer the question the opposite way. What is the one thing that you need from the research team to be more patient-centric in your work? Just one thing, and then we'll go to questions. So Ritu, I'll let you go first.
Well, thanks, Anne-Marie. And I have to say, this is such a close partnership between like clinical science and clinical operations to kind of deliver what we are aspiring for, having like patients front and center in each and every discussion, having their opinion there, because like that patient centricity is the key. It's the foremost at this point, just not even to like having that right population, having the key diversity in our studies, and then ensuring like we are including and giving an opportunity to each and every patient to be part of the trials. So it's such a huge partnership between operations and science. One thing I think, and that's where we are heading right now, where I think science and operation would work closely, would be identifying the right patient populations, right? Because a lot of times we are working in like just mostly like big academic centers. Those are like big sites. But then how do we trickle down and get those patients from like community centers, for example? And they are not set up for like large clinical trials. It's a huge operational challenge to kind of like overcome. But I think there are efforts, and we are working together to get across and get to like each and every patient and giving them an opportunity to be part of trials where there's like they do not have any treatment options available. So can they be part of these like life-changing therapies potentially and get that opportunity to get treatment? So
thank you. What a great answer. And Taras, you have the final word on this. Same question the other way.
Well, I think if I were to answer, and it would be very similar, which I think kind of undershows that there's probably a fair amount of accord between ClinOps and the therapeutic areas in terms of what we're trying to do. And I think part of what Ritu said is so important. It's, if our goal is really to develop drugs with representation of all the patients who are afflicted by the disease that we're looking to treat, kind of opening the lens of how you can participate in trials is so important. And like Ritu said, the traditional centers where we go, very, very important, but how we can be more mindful to include patients who may have been historically excluded from clinical research and kind of understand variations and incidence of disease in specific populations, et cetera. I think that's great, and that's probably what I would go to as well. I think what we have in industry is an increasing awareness and mission to place patients at the center of how we develop drugs and kind of balance as well the rigor of the scientific inquiry with kind of the operational achievability of the study. How we can help trials fit into patients' lifestyles, how we can help them fit into healthcare practice. So it's a really exciting time. I think the precision medicine-based, innovative designs that we've been talking about open a lot of potential, and so just excited to be part of it. Thank you.
Yeah. And I want to thank both of you for the magnificent partnership that you've shared throughout preparing for today. We've got a number of questions coming in, and I'll feed them to you as they've come in. But thank you so much for participating with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome back. And we've got a very brief question period with Taras and Ritu. And I'm going to take some of the questions in the order in which they've come in. And so let me throw out the very first question, which is, I think, one of the most important ones, as we've had so much great conversation on the engagement of patients in the, what I'll call these innovative new trial designs. Is there frameworks in place for how patients can be better engaged through the development of these new and innovative trials? And I have to believe that that's a tough question because these are new and innovative. But is there a recognition of frameworks? Is there any best practices being developed, et cetera? Ritu, I'll go to you.
Well, thank you, Anne-Marie, and thank you for the question. So I would say you're right. Like, since these are still evolutions, we are evolving with like all the master protocols, different kind of trials, so things are coming into place, and also like developing over the course of time. We are making improvements as and when we go, because we are also learning through the process of like how to set up these complex trials in our side with our sites and engaging our patients. So definitely a work in progress, but broadly there is a framework where as sponsors we have these protocols. We've been working with health authorities, and health authorities have been accepting like the flexibility we need in these protocols in terms of like changing the course of the protocol, in terms of like, can we close arms and then open new arms in the same protocol, right? So that kind of flexibility has an acceptance with the health authorities, and they have been very supportive in allowing sponsors to run trials like this.
Great. So is there some kind of, let me choose the words, repository organization where a lot of these frameworks, this learning is being captured in some sort of centralized way, or is it really trial by trial right now? In other words,
So,
how
for
do we
example,
share what's being gained by the running of these decentralized trials across the ecosystem?
Oh, that's great. Yeah, because as a sponsor, since we have, like, for example, I shared about the Morpheus platform. So within our company, we have the platform and we engage with like all the different functions across early innovation and late stage, and share whatever we are learning, how we can make them like more signal seeking, more efficacious trials. So definitely within the company. And then I think there are forums which are coming up where there's a cross exchange between different sponsors across companies, where there are discussions about how we can leverage from each other's learnings and efficiencies which we've built on, pain points which come up, how we can better help serve the patients and engage them better. So all those partnerships are being set up, and engagement is there through like industry collaborations group, for example.
Wow, fantastic! Thank you for sharing that with us. It leads to the next question here, which is the extent to which there's data sharing issues, especially given the various different. When you think of decentralized trials, the regulatory framework is different in various different places, et cetera, et cetera. And how has that impacted data sharing in general?
I think sponsors are trying to seek opportunities to have that transparency in data sharing. But again, we are limited by the regulatory guidance between different countries in terms of like how can share data across every country and region. So it's a work in progress. A lot has been done, but more to come in terms of like how much can be shared and where we can get to from here. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's just part of the process too. I have to believe that all the
Can you hear me
regulatory.
now? I can't hear them. Hang on. Can you hear me on the
I
headset?
think we're trying to get Taras back on in the background too.
I can't
Taras,
hear them.
we
I'm going to
can hear
reset my
you.
headset. Hang on.
That's great. And Ritu, we'll continue with our questions. Which there's another one here, which is how far in the future do you believe that we will be treating individual mutations instead of cancer sites?
It's already started, I have to say. It's not like a thing in future. It's something we're already working on. And it's just we are trying to get to that each individual patients or patients with like similar targets or mutations, for example, to get to so that we can make it a more personalized approach. So definitely something to look out for. It's happening currently with like different indications, different therapies, which are very targeted for specific targets or mutations per se. And I guess with the technologies evolving and we getting a better understanding of both the disease and like the biology of the patients, there'll be more to come in the future. So we are not far, but it's just a matter of time and how we advance in this field.
Thank you so much for two things. Number one is that we've been trying to get Taras back on for the Q&A as well, and we've had some technical difficulties, so you've kind of carried the torch for both of you. I can say to the audience that these two have worked beautifully together in preparing this presentation, and I want to thank you, Ritu, for ending on such an optimistic note. Thank you again for your participation today, and Taras, if you're out there and you can hear us, we thank you as well.
Thank you so much for having us. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you very much.